Greetings, everyone. My name's Keith.
And I'm Andy, and welcome to Brockton Bay.
Time for another episode of the Brockton Bay Chronicles, Reviewing Worm by Wildbow, the podcast where my friend Andy will predict, portend, and otherwise prognosticate about the adventures of Bug Girl Taylor and her merry band of mayhem makers. Andy is new to Worm, so as we go along, he'll be telling us what he thinks of the story and the characters involved. Andy, what are we reviewing today?
We'll be reviewing Arc 3, Agitation. But let's take a second and cover some new business. First, thanks to the new subscribers. We appreciate you being here. And we humbly ask that if you like what we're doing here, please share with others. Secondly, I understand we've got some more feedback from the listeners.
Yes, we do. YouTube subscriber Code Zeta has had some nice words of encouragement on the improvement we've made between episodes 1 and 2, and we thank him for it. He's also made a suggestion about the format that you and I have discussed. Folks will want to hear more from you as we go forward, which after all is the reason we're here, right?
Okay, if you say so. I don't know why they'd want to hear just from me, but sure.
So what I'll do is I'll give a little less detail in our point-by-point discussion so we can make this a little more conversational. Code Zeta also actually has a question for you. Think you can handle it?
I guess this is putting me on the spot, but I'll try.
All right, here we go. It's kind of a long one, so here we go. Given Arc 3's events especially, thus far we've seen this 15-year-old girl mutilate and necrotize a man alive, punt someone's face in, curb stomp them against the wall, pull a knife to the neck of another girl, and perform psychological terrorism on an entire crowd, just to name a few things. Now, with all that in mind, how do you feel about Taylor's way of doing things? And what do you think her character and story will look like going forward? What is Taylor 1 year from now, given current events, keeping in mind what we know of her mindset, traumas, and dreams to be a hero? So it sounds like he's wants you to evaluate where she is now and where do you think she'll be in a year from now?
Wow. I was hoping this would be along the lines of what my favorite ice cream flavor was or something like that. So
no such luck.
Yeah, this is a little bit more to chew on. Well, I think about this a lot. I try to put myself in Taylor's place. I think in high school, we all have dreams of what we want to be and what we might turn out to be. And I think all of us have probably experienced some trauma in high school, some more than others, because of being in a new area and my dad being the former principal of the high school. I experienced some very specific bullying. And so I feel like I've got a little bit of things I can relate to with Taylor. I think she'll stay true to wanting to be a hero rather than a villain. I think Wildbow is trying to show how easy it can be to take one turn in a path versus another, and how little decisions over time can add up, resulting in you being in a place you didn't intend to be. But it seems like Taylor's got some internal strength and kind of the fortitude to persevere. I think there'll definitely be crises that come up, but in a year from now, I see her being a super in the wards, but staying in touch with Brian and trying to kind of pull him out of being a villain. That's my take.
Interesting. So you see kind of an investment in Brian at this point?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound a little weird. I think there's a classic case of hero worship a little bit. You have the older person with their own apartment and in good shape and willing to share knowledge, being a mediator, peacekeeper, if you will. And I think that that's very appealing to Taylor. She's definitely starved for connection and interaction. And even though she's a reluctant villain, I think she sees Brian as more than just, your typical two-dimensional bad guy. And there are things that are attractive about him to her, not just on a physical level, which you see, in high school for sure.
Yeah.
But the way he carries himself, the way he interacts with the rest of the group. So I could see them staying connected, even though I think, as I said, Taylor's going to turn to the light, if you will, turn away from the dark side.
Okay. Cool. Well, that sounds good, buddy. Thank you. And thanks to Code Zeta for the question. And we'd certainly be glad to answer any more worm-related questions. So, folks, feel free to leave them in the comments down below or send them to us in the Reddit thread. And with that out of the way, what do you say we move on to our point by point?
Let's get started.
All right. Arc 3, Chapter 1. And we see Taylor heading off on her morning run to go meet up with Brian. And he has something for her. He gives her a key to the team's loft. And once again, Wildbow gives us a good description of the town as she's running off, taking her morning run to meet him and get the key from him. Opinions of that, the area, the meeting that they had?
There were a lot of interesting points here. It's great the way Wildbow continues to expand the descriptions of the town. You could definitely see examples or things that connect to places we've all been, where there's areas that are affluent, areas that have struggled economically, changes in the way the businesses have been going. And so it's neat to see that. One thing I thought was interesting was her describing her training. I don't know if it's the engineer in me, but I think you are along the same lines in the training you did with your kids on your teams. We got to have the data. You run to a time, you run to a distance, you keep track of how you're doing. I found over time that on some days I feel better than others, and I feel like I'm pushing myself, and it turns out I'm not. So without that data, you end up maybe not progressing as much as you could. But she's, doing it all on her own.
Right.
And so she's come up with her own yardstick, if you will, and that's how she's doing her training.
I think that's a fair assessment given both of our histories, and as far as that kind of training goes. Yeah, it's a pretty fair assessment. So she's there with Brian on the pier, and they're talking about things.
Yeah, I think it's neat the way they're welcoming her in, and he's trying to, again, like I said, play the peacekeeper with what happened with Rachel, giving her a little background about that. Given the insights he provides, you can see where Rachel reacted the way she did. I've never obviously been in those kind of situations, but what you see portrayed is that kids who go through the foster system, they're always expecting the worst and expecting to be betrayed. And so they get very protective of themselves, very defensive.
Right. And then you put on top of that the gaining of superpowers and not having a support system to help her through, and not being a well-adjusted person to begin with. That could lead to a pretty volatile combination.
Definitely. Yeah. As we discussed previously, she's always got her finger itching to push the button, I think. So but it's understandable given her background.
And while these two are talking, Taylor takes a moment and makes a crab dance, which was, kind of funny. And I think when I read that, I think I was as surprised as Brian that her power extended to creatures like that.
Yeah, that was an interesting turn of events there. I expected it to be fairly limited based on how she had described it in the battle with Lung. but it's not surprising, I guess, in retrospect, that she could be able to handle crabs. They call them the spiders of the sea. So there might be some evolutionary link there. And then she describes it as, maybe it's anything with just a simplistic brain setup that she might be able to control.
Right. So after the meeting with Brian, she heads home, hops the bus, and then heads on over to school, which this ended up being a pretty short visit to school. I got to say, I was kind of disappointed that it didn't take much to have her turn around and leave.
I was actually of the opposite opinion. Ever since she had kind of connected with these folks and all the bad stuff had been happening at school, I was thinking to myself, why not just bail on high school altogether? And you've got a place you can hang out during the day. Brian had mentioned that he was doing online school, and so he would probably help her get set up with that, and she could come up with plausible reasons not to go back. So I kind of was surprised she kept up with it as long as she did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I can remember sitting in the bus trying to psych myself up for whatever encounter I was expecting, especially my freshman year. And there are many times where I thought, well, I could just walk off campus. It's an open campus and nobody's going to notice. But my dad being a school administrator, I knew I would get caught pretty quickly. So I had to stick it out. I didn't know if he was going to send helicopters out to find me or what. So that wasn't really an option for me, but she had everything in place. So I was kind of, if I'd had that option, I would have taken it as well and just turned around and headed out the door.
Which is pretty much what she does in this case. And so as we move on to chapter 2, she does what you said. She heads over to the loft. And when she gets there, she sees Brian trying desperately to get Alec to take some training in hand-to-hand combat. And Alec is pretty discouraged about it.
Well, it points out that there's a big difference between Brian and Alec's physique and age. It's amazing at that age what 3 years difference can make. Here you have Brian, who's about 18, we're guessing,
right?
Pretty buff, at least in good shape, and Alec, who's about 15 and typical 15-year-old, not much muscle, not much reaction time. It doesn't look like, and to be frank, he's got superpowers. So it's kind of like, well, why would I worry so much about this? I'll just try to mess them up before they get to me. So
right. And he also falls back on the excuse of having a taser. And Brian's response to that was, hey, well, what if your taser's broken or you don't have it? And, Alec has basically phoned it in at that point, I think.
I think so. Yeah. And I would just have a backup. I mean, and Taylor had talked about that in the battle with Lung, that she should really have a second pepper spray canister. So, you just carry a backup, just like the cops in the TV shows. You always got your one on your ankle, right? In case.
Exactly.
So
Taylor also asked Brian if he would mind giving her a few quick pointers. Alec kind of makes a snide snicker about it, and to which Brian responds, hey, look, if you don't want to train like this, fine, just don't be a jerk about it. And he flashes Taylor a smile, and you definitely get the thought that, hey, is there some chemistry between these two? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I've kind of wondered about that at times. It's hard to know right now if it's more of just Brian kind of admiring and having the little sister kind of interaction, and being able to tap into what seems like his natural desire to teach or to share knowledge.
Very true.
But it seems like it's one of those things that could be a classic. As they move forward, things start changing from being a friend or admiration thing to something more. So I could definitely see that happening.
And then as this goes on, the subject of their boss comes up. And this is the first time we really get into any kind of depth on this. Tattletale happens to be on the phone with the boss. And after she finishes the conversation, she comes over to the group and says, "Hey guys, guess what? We're robbing a bank." I didn't see anything like that coming.
Neither did I. I've really been thinking about him a lot and trying to figure it out. And as these chapters, this arc goes on, it becomes increasingly curious what's going on behind the scenes.
Who's the man behind the curtain?
Exactly. Yeah. It's hard to believe what's coming here as they start figuring out about how they're going to do it and how it's going to be worthwhile for them.
Yeah, Brian, early on, he was not a fan of the idea. They had a pretty mature discussion going over the pros and cons for these teenagers, discussing why they were successful, what worked for them in the past. And Lisa came out and mentioned how the boss wanted them to do it at a specific time. And she had negotiated a 2-for-1 split on the money that they got from the bank. So he made it worth their while to go for and accept the risk.
Yeah. And it was kind of shocking how he was also willing to pay for anything they needed, any equipment, any bribes they might think would work. He really wants this to happen and at a very specific time. And I think it's mentioned that he has plans for something else that's going to happen at that time. So, it seems like he's got his fingers in a lot of pies here. And it's already been kind of implied that he might have info that other people aren't available to. And that, I don't know, I've read too many of these things, watched too many movies, but that got me thinking his powers seem to line up a little bit with Lisa's. He seems to know more than a normal person would.
Interesting.
So could Lisa somehow could the boss be a figurehead, or I don't know. My mind was spinning in all sorts of different directions. So,
oh, okay. Interesting on that. So basically, after they have a good discussion about this, they come to an agreement and they're going to go ahead and rob the bank. As the discussion was winding on, Taylor was desperately looking for ways to not make it happen. But once it seemed that it was going to happen, her whole mindset shifted to, well, basically, how can I help keep anyone from being hurt during this operation? Civilians primarily, her concern.
Sure. She's supposed to be a good guy, just going undercover. Good gal, I should say. And there comes the possibility of people getting hurt that, are just innocent bystanders. And so that's got to be very concerning to her. And she presses
that goes
them.
against her. Yeah, that goes against her whole reason for being there. She's a good guy. She doesn't want anybody to get hurt during it. She doesn't want to get tucked into a robbery where she could be kept from being a hero later on. And B, she wants to protect people because long term she wants to be a hero.
Exactly. Yeah, this is that classic conundrum that undercover folks run into. How far do I need to go to make sure they keep believing I'm on their side without compromising my principles?
During the team discussion, we touch on who the capes might be that would come to stop them during the robbery, because they figure, hey, as Brian said, no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. And so they have a discussion about potential heroes that they would face off against. And this is where they go into detailed discussion about the wards, their members, and some of their powers. What did you think about the discussion about the powers of these capes on the other side of this?
Pretty formidable powers, definitely. I think the boss has set it up so that they have a good idea the number that will be opposing them, and that will help keep the advantage to their side, of the side of the undersiders. but some of these folks are pretty stout, and at least one of them, Vista, seems like she's continuing to ramp up on her powers and isn't sure where the team isn't sure what the limitations are there, other than this interesting thing that comes out called the Manton effect.
Yes, I'm glad you picked up on that. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's an interesting twist on superpowers. I like it a lot. The problem you run into in a lot of the superhero stories is what they call the Deus ex machina, the machine
Right.
of God, where you have somebody that's has unlimited power, and so it totally throws the balance off, and it makes the story very hard to sustain. Superman ran into this a lot, and that's one of the big reasons I never really got into his character. Was just like, well, he would just beat up everybody, or he would just
Sure.
see through things, or he would blow hard enough to blow everybody. It was just he was overpowered compared to everybody else.
Pretty
So
much, if you didn't have a fistful of kryptonite, you were done for.
right, and there wasn't a lot of that lying around, so it was pretty rare stuff. So you had to really either just do stuff that was beneath his notice, or try to set up some super elaborate scheme so that, kind of like what they're doing with the bank robbery, he would be on one side of the world while you were doing something on the other side. So the Manton effect, I think, does a great job of nipping that in the bud. You're not going to have people who are so overpowered that the rest of the folks are just kind of like ants crawling around and hoping they don't get stepped on by the person. So it's very interesting twist, and I like it a lot.
I also liked the statement, that the point that they had mentioned about how there was the perception that people who get their powers at an extremely young age end up being some of the strongest capes out there. That, in combination with the Manton effect, were two things in this chapter that I really kind of dug on.
That's a great point. I had overlooked that, but we had talked in a previous episode about how the people with the powers were often unsure of what the limitations were,
Right.
and were leery of pushing things too far. So it could be that if you get it when you're younger, you have less of a feeling of responsibility. It's kind of like when you're the little kid, you can get away with stuff because your parents are like, well, you don't know better.
Right.
But then when you get older, they're like, okay, now you do know better. So you shouldn't have done that. And so if you get it at a young age, you maybe experiment more readily. And so you're able to kind of determine those limits a little better, or at least rule things out that might be, oh, that's a bad way to go with that. And so having that exploration time could assist the younger ones getting stronger faster.
Right. Fair point. Yeah. And so, as you were saying before, the boss has kind of arranged or requested they rob this bank at a specific time. Turns out that the protectorate is going to be occupied on the other side of town. They think they have an idea of which wards would be available, and they're pretty confident in their ability to handle them. And this takes us on to the next chapter, into chapter 4. Taylor has dinner with her dad, has a nice meal. They have a discussion, and then she goes off and has a rather contentious meeting with Armsmaster. Thoughts on those two items?
Yeah, the dinner with dad is about what you'd expect. Taylor had ditched school again, I think, and had been at the lair helping to set up her space, moving stuff out of the storage closet. I
Right.
thought,
And I'm
oh,
sorry, I wanted I almost missed this point. Right. They did spend the time. She ditched school, like you said. They set up her space there, and they watched movies from a place called Earth Aleph.
yeah, that was another interesting twist. So one thing they often gloss over in superhero movies is what happens if a super does push the envelope and go too far with their limitations. And apparently this Professor Haywire had ripped a hole in the space-time continuum, and they had uncovered an alternate Earth that they had limited access to, but apparently things like movies could, I don't know, live stream between them or be passed between. So yeah, very interesting. It's kind of again a cool world building thing by Wildbow, where he's just throwing in these glimpses of stuff that happens with superpowers playing with their powers.
Glimpse is exactly the way to describe that, because it's hidden in there. It's just like, oh yeah, I had fish for dinner last night. Oh yeah, there's we have a interdimensional connection with another Earth. I mean, that was kind of how I felt. I think I went past it and had to double back the first time I read through this. So again, Taylor's meal with her father is okay, but I just have this vision of these two individuals sitting on either side of this gulf trying to reach out to each other.
Yeah, it was complicated before when just the bullying was going on and Taylor didn't feel like she could fully open up about that. But now she has this secret identity as well, a secret life that's going on. She's getting more and more enmeshed with the Undersiders. She's able to kind of share that they're friends, but she has to be very careful about how much she's let slip. She doesn't want to make a mistake there and alert her dad in some way. He's already on edge enough because of her late night earlier on. So
Correct.
it is tense. These meals together, it's kind of comforting for Taylor, and that's kind of a touchstone in reality, but it's also fraught with it's like a minefield kind of, and she has to be careful where she steps.
So she gets permission from him to go off to meet Lisa for coffee, as was the excuse he gave her. And she heads over to meet Armsmaster to ask for some help.
Yeah, I think it shows again how Taylor's committed to her goal of being on the side of good, being one of the supers rather than a villain. It's unfortunate it doesn't go as well as she would hope, but I wasn't surprised at some of Armsmaster's reactions, given how the original interaction went with him.
Do you think you have a feel for his personality now? What kind of guy is he? Have you given any more thought to his personality? You think you need a little bit more?
Well, I can shoot from the hip. I think given how things have gone with Wildbow so far, where it seems like there's deeper and deeper layers, I'm guessing there'll be more revelations coming down the road with him. But just a quick take, it seems like he's very black and white. He's got a kind of a strong judgmental streak, kind of my way or the highway. But he also has some ambition. So he was willing to kind of go along with Taylor's scheme when it benefited him, but now he's not so sure what's in it for him, so to speak. And so he's taken more of a hard line. He's fallen back into a hardliner mode.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Taylor was naive here?
I think that's likely. I think that's a really excellent point. She's only 15.
Right.
So, and the stuff that she probably sees in the media is all the good parts with as little of the seamy underside as possible. I think as kids, we all attribute more intelligence and more character to adults than they might actually have.
Mm-hmm.
As adults, we realize that things are way more complicated than we thought when we were kids.
Certainly.
So, yeah, I think there's definitely some naivete there.
So as they're discussing this, he was a little nervous about the fact that she had said she was going to go undercover, and they talked some more. This is before things get completely going downhill in their discussions, and he invites her to come tell her story and give her information to the rest of the team at the Protectorate, to which she was just thrilled at the chance to meet. And we get some more names here. Would have the chance to meet Miss Militia, Triumph, Velocity, Dauntless, Battery, and Assault. And she was just over the moon at that. But she certainly quickly realizes she really can't do that for fear of what Tattletale may pick up.
Yeah, and that's got to be a constant running fear for Taylor. Every time I'm reading about the things that Tattletale's able to do, it's, as I've said before, creeping me out. When they were planning the bank robbery, Tattletale or Lisa was just calling up pictures on the internet and able to infer all these things about how the bank was laid out, where the people were, where the vaults were, how to get to different things. And that's just, as I said, creepy that she's able to do those kind of things. And so being an undercover operative in that situation with somebody who has that mental capability to detect lies or to ferret out information, it's just, yeah, very unnerving.
I agree. My first read through, at this point, I definitely underappreciated Tattletale's power. So as the Armsmaster and Taylor are having their discussion, he begins getting frustrated because every time he asks her something, she basically says, I can't reply. I can't answer this because of, and Armsmaster correctly guesses, because of the Tattletale girl, to which, basically that's the deal. As you were saying, she can't give him any hints for fear of Tattletale, maybe the response time changes, or maybe they change their readiness status or something like that. And things go pretty downhill pretty quickly from there. Armsmaster has had enough. It's like, look, you're out of your depth here.
Yeah, and that's a legit point, I think. He sees before him a very young girl. She's been in one battle. She's trying to pull off this undercover gig against a mind reader, and they're planning some really big caper. I think, yeah, it's legit for him to say that she's in over her head. I think he could have handled it a lot better. It seems kind of like, okay, I'm right, you're over your head, so don't do it, rather than, well, let's brainstorm some possible ways that, we could make this better.
Yeah, no, definitely. Did they discuss what happened to Lung? And he blames her for Lung almost dying, to which Taylor calls BS and makes a pretty good guess at what she thinks happened.
That was an interesting twist. I didn't see that coming, because I thought it would be more about Taylor not kind of knowing her own strength and in a panic sending so many venomous bugs that it overwhelmed Lung. But then looking back after Taylor makes her statements, it's kind of like Lung nothing was stopping him. He kept powering through everything she was throwing at him. So what would have changed it? And then Taylor has obviously thought a lot about it and said, well, you gave him these drugs, and that probably damped down his healing power to be able to fight off the venom. So that makes a lot more sense.
Agree. That made sense. He was out of it. And yeah, he probably start reducing his ability to heal himself. And that allowed the poisons from the insects to take further hold. And so, nobody's hands are clean here. So these two are really at each other's throats. And finally, Taylor manages to elicit a request from him. She had originally wanted him to basically be her backup if things went south and she had to turn on the Undersiders in the middle of the robbery, to which he kind of is like, no, I'm not going to help you there. After this discussion ends, and he essentially dismisses her. Taylor says, I'm going to go ahead to herself. I'm going to go ahead and win the trust of the Undersiders. We're going to go through with this bank robbery, and then I'll hand over all this undercover information to Miss Militia, definitely not Armsmaster. I think he's not going to be getting a Christmas card from her.
Great point. Yeah, I think she had a rude awakening dealing with him. She thought certain things about him after the lung thing. She was a little suspicious, but I think her suspicions unfortunately were confirmed that he's got this kind of hardliner, my way or the highway attitude, and she's not going to be able to get much help from him.
So we move on to chapter 6, which is the beginning of the bank robbery itself, as the Undersiders get themselves in position. Taylor and Lisa are in a van, and they're having a kind of interesting discussion on the relationship of capes, both the villains and the heroes. Did you read anything into that? What were your thoughts on that general conversation?
Well, it kind of reminded me of the movie Unbreakable. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh, absolutely.
But that was kind of the premise of Samuel L. Jackson's character, was that if there are people that are very evil out there, then there must be, in order to have balance in the universe, there must be people who are extra good. And if there are people that have powers in a negative sense, then there must be powers in a positive sense. And so it kind of got into that whole, the dark side balancing out the Jedis, and
right,
all those kind of things. So it's a great, I don't know what you'd call it, if archetype's the right term, but a theme that runs throughout our lives, throughout history, that whenever there is evil, good will rise to meet it.
Sure.
And that you kind of can't have one without the other. They're two sides of a coin.
Yeah. And so she talks about the full contact cops and robbers aspect of this. And one of the questions she asked is, how come some of these low level capes, these I forget which one, whether it was Uber or Leet, Uber, that's who it was. How come they don't send him straight to the birdcage after his trial? They inevitably put someone like that, a B-list villain, put them in regular jail, and they break out. And Lisa speculates that it's so they can keep the status quo, kind of that yin and yang, huh?
That's what I was thinking. It seems like a pretty cynical attitude about it, but I could see where she would say that. Based on how things went with Armsmaster, that gets you thinking that not everybody in the Protectorate is Clark Kent, that they're maybe more like the Watchmen than the Justice League.
Very good. Yeah.
And so you're going to have folks that are kind of saying, well, I've got to have somebody to fight. So if I throw this person in a hole that they'll never get out of, then eventually there's going to be nobody around to justify my existence. It seems like new people are coming on the scene all the time, though. So it seems a little short-sighted to me, but maybe I'm more optimistic
yeah.
and they're more pragmatic about it.
I don't want to dwell too much on this, but I like this train of thought from her. She talks about the various levels of villainy. You have, folks like Taylor and herself who are out there maybe with an agenda, but they're basically having fun living a second life. Then you have people who you wouldn't want to mess with, even if they didn't have powers, like Lung or this heartbreaker person, or to which she included Bitch. And then you have these monsters. She names the Slaughterhouse Nine, Nilbog, and the Endbringer. So there's various levels to this villainy that she's mentioning in this game of cops and robbers that she's talking about.
That's an excellent point, and it makes sense. Just like people are on a spectrum from good to evil, you're going to have some villains that are way worse than others. I did think it was interesting that Taylor brought up the Endbringers twice, and Lisa picked up on that. And that it seemed like they're really, really bad folks. And Lisa intuits that Taylor's being pretty morbid.
Right.
I'm not sure where that's going to go, but it seems like that might be a key down the road.
The Inbringers?
Not so much that not that they'll factor in so much, but that Taylor has this kind of morbid streak.
Oh, okay.
And it would make sense. I mean, her mom died at a young age. She's been bullied horribly.
Her best friend turned on her.
Exactly. So you start thinking about the worst of the worst, and just your mind goes to dark places. And as she's looking through that Super's Wikipedia, I'm sure she came across these folks and said, okay, well, that's what evil really looks like, the worst evil. So at least I'm not in that. I'm not involved. I haven't got sucked into anything like that. So maybe a little comfort that things could be a lot worse.
Yeah. And so Lisa manages to cheer her up, and as they finish up their conversation, and Gru and the rest of them arrive, and Taylor says, hey, let's go rob a bank. And that takes us on into chapters 7 and 8, essentially, is the story of the bank robber. Tell me, start at the beginning and give me your rundown on the entire bank robbery from situation to situation. What were your impressions of that? Well,
it was amazing the way Wildbow had this all put together. It was definitely something that was very easy to picture. And I thought he did a great job of switching back and forth between the different interactions that were going on.
Right. Sorry to interrupt, but picture, I'm glad you mentioned that word, because I think from this point to the battle with the wards, I just remember thinking the first time I read this, I would just about give an appendage to see this in a live action movie, because he wrote it so well, and it was tense, and it was well put together, and you could visualize it pretty well. So, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's no problem. I totally agree. It brought me in mind of some of the great heist movies and the scenes where they have everything mapped out. You picture them in their lair with like a mock-up of things, and this is what's going to come from this side, we'll do this, and they execute their plan, and room by room search, trying to find the right places, the right people. And I thought it was very well executed. Taylor's got her part and does a great job with that. There are a couple of glitches, as there are with any plans,
right?
But there's definitely one thing that seems kind of out of place, and it seems like Taylor starts feeling sick, or she's getting a headache.
Yeah.
So that
leads into a whole unique situation there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Taylor, it turns out that handling the hostages the way that they did was Taylor's idea, and she kind of feels sick to herself once she sees the fear and trauma on these people's faces. A little bit of regret there, huh?
Definitely. And you can totally. I'm surprised. I guess I didn't see it coming, but it totally makes sense. Everybody's kind of creeped out by bugs for the most part. Even if you don't mind bugs that much, having them crawl on you is unpleasant, and it tends to trick our mind, at least for most people I've talked to, for a period of time afterwards, where every little time one of your hairs gets moved by a piece of clothing or whatever, you think there's another bug on you. So to be actively doing this to all these people whose only crime was that they were at the bank that day, I could see where there'd be a lot of remorse on her part.
Yeah, setting up the situation with her headache, she had threatened everybody by saying, hey, look, I've got Black Widow spiders under my control. I've placed 3 of them on you, and if you don't do what I say, I can sense it, and I will have them bite you, which I think would render anybody compliant in that situation. So the Undersiders are going through the bank vault. They're loading up the saddlebags that the dogs are carrying with money. Tattletale is getting some other documents and some information from the computers. the wards arrive, and it turns out that more of them arrive than was planned for, and that throws their entire getaway scheme out the window.
Yeah, there was one point I forgot to mention, and that was how, unfortunately, I was able to picture the giant mass of bugs coming out of the van.
Oh, right. Yes.
That was not a pleasant image. Kind of arachnophobia flashbacks, if you will. But
so we're not going to make fun of Gru for stepping back when they came spilling out like a river, huh?
Not at all. No, I would have headed for the hills right there, I think. So totally get that reaction. But to go back to the battle, as Gru had mentioned earlier, the plans, they always don't survive impact with the actual battlefield. And that's definitely comes up big time here. And they have more folks against them than they thought. And it seems like they might have had some strategies that weren't expected as well.
Yes, including Clock Blocker and Aegis switching uniforms. But we get another look at Tattletale's power in action, and she realizes that's what's going on. Their modified getaway plan had Bitch charging over to take out Aegis with one of her dogs. And at the last minute, Tattletales advises, hey, no, you're going for Clock Blocker, because they had switched uniforms. She simply by looking at the body language between the two, she was able to figure out that they had switched uniforms, and had Bitch and the dog she was riding been hit by Clock Blocker, they'd have lost a heavy hitter right then and there.
Totally. And again, Tattletale creeping me out. She picks up on that. I thought this was a great twist that Wildbow had in there. It totally makes sense that you would want to, if you had the chance, try to trick the enemy into thinking to get them to go after one person instead of another, and maybe keep your best folks on the field and use everybody's abilities to the best through some strategy. So that was pretty neat, but Tattletale figures it out, and Rachel goes for the guy in disguise, and we're off to the races. It's battle royale.
Yes, it is indeed. So during the planning, they had mentioned to Rachel she could go nuts essentially with her dogs and have them attack Aegis because of his unique ability. He's not invulnerable. It's just that his body has massive redundancies and he can handle pain. Again, I don't know the amount of thought that Wildbow has put into these characters, these supers, is really just amazing. How he comes up with these different capes and their abilities and their weaknesses.
That's a great insight. I remember playing superhero role-playing games when I was younger, and that was always the hardest part for me, was to try to come up with an origin and what the powers were. And there were different tools you could use to try to make it easier, but it always seemed like the powers were just the same as somebody from DC or somebody from Marvel. Wildbow has just a very amazing imagination as how he's come up with these. I've had some luck with it since I was a kid, but for the most part, lots of things are derivative. This seems to be very original thinking on his part, and very interesting and enjoyable to read.
So they have a modified escape plan. They begin to execute it. And as they were assessing, prior to them starting the evacuation, they realized that they actually had a person up on the roof. So in addition to more wards than they expected, they thought they weren't sure who the person on the roof could have been a member of New Wave, could have been a member of the Protectorate, but it turns out that it was Glory Girl. At this point, Taylor's head is really killing her. She's beginning to lose control over bugs, and she still doesn't know why. Glory Girl comes in and blasts her way into the bank, and it turns out that among one of the hostages was her sister, Panacea.
That was a really interesting twist too. You typically have the off-duty cop who's
Right.
there as one of the hostages, and maybe they try to be a hero. And I wouldn't have blamed Wildbow for going that way.
Because it would have been the easier route.
For sure. Yeah. Everybody would have been like, oh yeah,
Yeah, I've seen this
that makes
trope.
sense. Exactly. But to put a super in street clothes in there and have her be this panacea, which we saw in the interlude in the previous arc, and her not sure what she can do to be able to inflict pain or inhibit things. It's pretty neat the way she's able to do that and kind of try to disable Taylor, and very unexpected, very interesting twist.
Yeah, who comes up with that? I mean, yeah, I mean, so here you have Panacea who can alter biology, and is able to figure out a way to set up this feedback loop that shorts out Taylor's ability to control her bugs and gives her a massive headache, basically darn near disabling it. I'm again, the second read through, I'm picking up and appreciating things like that a lot more.
Well, that's cool that you're able to keep picking up things. Rereadability, I think, is one of the hallmarks of great writing. The idea reminded me again of role-playing games where you have certain spells, but then you've got to try to come up with interesting ways to make them work and alternate things to try to do things. I remember one scenario where the party I was with got teleported 10,000 feet in the air, and none of us could fly. None of us had anything. And one of the guys came up with the idea of casting an enlarged spell on his cloak to make it big enough to be like a parachute. It almost saved us, but it was a really interesting twist on it. And I see that same kind of twist here with Wildbow coming up with these alternate uses of powers to have an impact on this battle and this bank robbery.
As we see this situation evolve, Taylor has a knife to Amy's throat. Glory Girl is floating away nearby, threatening her, looking menacing, and Tattletale comes in. And here we have the kind of display of Tattletale's power that I'm sure just gave you fits.
Yeah, she starts doing the whole digging through people's minds thing, and obviously has some very impactful information that she's daring to share, and it's enough to stop Glory Girl in her tracks.
There's some kind of secret there. And it's, as we realize, remember from the previous arc, that Amy is Glory Girl's adopted sister. So something is there, and Tattletale is skillfully manipulating these sisters and giving them the advantage just by using her power of knowledge.
Yeah, creepy on top of creepy. Tattletale is just so powerful. You start to wonder if she's also able to plant suggestions, even if she isn't able to directly manipulate people's minds, just getting people to question what they believe or question what they think they know by spinning what she knows in such a way that people become unsure is almost as powerful, I think. And so she really turns the tables in this situation. It looks like it's pretty hopeless for the undersiders.
Right. Amy is desperate to keep whatever this knowledge is secret. She ends up wrenching herself free from Taylor's grip. Taylor has to move her knife from her neck to keep her from inadvertently slicing Amy's throat. Glory Girl uses that moment of chaos to grab Tattletale and fling her into Taylor. I got worried at this point because I thought the situation was looking pretty dire for them two. It turns out that Tattletale found a weakness in Glory Girl. What did you think about that? I mean, with regards to Glory Girl not being actually invincible.
That was totally unexpected. I fell into the trap, I guess, of, oh, well, this is kind of a Superman type character, not thinking that there would be nuances to it. But again, Wildbow throws us for a loop, and Tattletale is able to find the chink in the armor, so to speak, and things start looking up for the Undersiders.
Right. And we get the name Alexandria brought up again before Amy's escape. When Tattletale had first entered the room and started needling Glory Girl, Taylor's response was, hey, can we not piss off Alexandria Jr.? So you get the sense that this Alexandria person is kind of the same type of cape, but stronger.
Right. Yeah. I assumed it was kind of maybe it was Glory Girl is the daughter of Alexandria, but yeah, it seems like there's some kind of connection there, and that she's just a younger version that hasn't maybe fully come into her powers. So better be careful, because you don't know, she doesn't know her own strength yet.
Right. So the team escapes. They have a successful getaway. Gru is filling their nearby area with darkness. They're able to change out of their cape costume into their civvies. I like how Taylor talks about the response of the local cops and the PRT to a situation like this, basically doing what they can to cordon off the area and keep civilians out of the way in an attempt to minimize any injuries or damage.
Yeah, I thought the getaway was well described and well planned. It had that classic, get out of your uniform and get into something that will let you blend in and take advantage of what the expected response is. And so, yeah, it all worked out that they were able to get away.
And during the getaway, any remorse or hesitation, I mean, for a fleeting moment, Taylor allowed herself to let her hair down, so to speak, and kind of relish in the fact that the gang actually pulled off the heist.
Yeah, I can't imagine the relief there. She had so many reservations going in, as did Brian Gru, probably the most seasoned person on the team. And for them to start out so well, have all sorts of monkey wrenches thrown into the mix, and then still be able to pull it off, has got to feel really good, even though she doesn't want to be she doesn't want to be a bad person, a villain. Still pretty neat to have it work.
Yeah, she stuck to the plan, her hope of keeping anybody from being injured. That was her primary concern.
Exactly.
So we move on to the interlude, the wards. We get a deep look at the wards, and these poor young heroes arrive back at PRT HQ and immediately get chewed out by Director Piggott.
Yeah, this whole interlude was very interesting. It's something, again, that you don't really think about in the superhero genre. There were times it was touched on a little bit in the Marvel movies where things didn't go well on a mission, and it was touched on a little bit, I guess, in the X-Men as people were training and that kind of thing. But here you have, the minor leagues, if you will, and all the restrictions they have, and how poorly they handled things. You want the kids, obviously, to try to handle things on their own, but you need to sometimes be disciplined. And Piggott seems to have an unfortunate name that leads to a very predictable nickname.
Yeah. She is not happy with Kid Wynn and his alternator cannon.
Great insight there. And now that you mention it, that's one of my favorite things that we kind of glossed over in the battle. But the way that he, as a tinker, comes up with something new and he starts using it, but then it's kind of like, well, great, but what if it falls into the wrong hands? And you get this whole, again, world building section where, well, there's got to be some kind of regulation on what tinkers can do.
Right.
It's got to be some kind of committee that oversees what happens and makes sure that it's not a Professor Haywire thing. It's not going to tear the fabric of the universe.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, again, it's one of those glimpses into a corner that you hadn't really thought about, but seems super interesting. And you're hoping it'll be glimpsed again later on.
Right. And I like that as well for the exact same reason. You would, just as we have civilian oversight of the military, in a world where you've got superheroes, you definitely would want to have civilian oversight of the capes to give them legitimacy in the hopefully rare instance that a good guy makes a mistake and there's an unfortunate loss of life. There's accountability through the civilian government.
Great point. That's one of the standard counterbalances in these kind of stories is the government acknowledges how much benefit they get from interacting with the capes, but there's also the concern that the capes will just take over.
Right.
And so you've got to have the oversight, and that's going to lead to tension at times.
Yeah. Aegis is pretty beat up. The one of the dogs has punctured him front to back. He goes and tries to stitch himself up. Gallant, Clock Blocker, Vista, and Browbeat, they begin their debrief session. Armsmaster, Miss Militia, and Panacea arrive later, and they bring Panacea along to in part to thank the wards for coming to her rescue and to offer healing to the wards. Let me back up real quick. Director Piggott was not happy that Glory Girl was on the scene. She was not authorized to be there.
Right. So we get into that relationship between Gallant and Glory Girl, and him just kind of inviting her along, trying to rationalize it. It turned out Glory Girl's sister was in the bank. But in the end, again, this is that oversight versus the capes wanting to do what they want to do. And Piggott puts her foot down and says, if we say you're going in, you're going in. You don't need to invite your friends. It's not a beat up party on villains.
Yeah, that's true. Piggott runs a pretty tight ship. And these are young teenage individuals and with superpowers, and they got to follow the rules. I like how I think she's putting the fear of God into Kid Win for using that alternator cannon without it having been approved. And he's clearly scared to death, but the older heroes, they see it and they're like, look, he's just going to get yelled at basically, and to keep him from doing something stupid and pushing against authority.
Exactly. It's a typical tactic. It works. You want to try to kind of be tough on the young ones to help them, toe the line early and get in the habit of discipline. And then as they get older and they can understand more, you can help describe to them why things were the way they were.
Right.
And yeah, so we just see that playing out, and the older ones going along with it because they know there's more bark than bite there.
Two things I don't want to forget about. First off, Vista clearly has a crush on Gallant. And then also during the debrief, the young wards are trying to identify the person who was controlling the bugs. They go through their computer network and they do a couple of searches and come up with the only available name, which was Skitter.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that fits. It's a good name. I was thinking it was going to be Worm because of the title, but I guess Skitter is what they're going to call her. So it fits, I think.
And any thoughts on young Miss Vista and her blushing crush on Gallant?
Well, I think it's natural.
He comes off as a pretty charming guy.
Yeah, and it's a very similar dynamic to what could happen with Taylor and Brian. You've got the younger person in the group looking up to the established and attractive in so many ways mentor or coach, and so there's it's definitely a possibility of a crush happening there.
One other thing, when Gallant is getting treated by Panacea, we get a quick description about how he can see people's emotions like an aura around them, which again was a pretty neat power. And while they were alone in his area, the two of them had a pretty personal discussion between Gallant and Panacea with regards to their relationship, both of their relationships with Glory Girl.
Again, that's kind of one of those things where there's that gap in the known powers and what the actual powers are. So they had mentioned when they were planning that Gallant could hit with these blasts of light that would pack an emotional punch.
Right.
But now we're seeing that he not only can send stuff, but he senses what's already there. And so, and with how volatile Glory Girl is, you could guess that would make it pretty hard for him being in a relationship, which probably points to why they mentioned it's on again, off again. You know, we've probably all had those relationships with folks that are very easy to read. And if they're volatile people, then it can be tough to be around them because it's like, all right, we know you're going into that mode now. So I'm just going to step away for a while. I'll come back when you calm down. So, and then, you know, Panacea is, kind of the third part of this triangle here. It's very interesting triangle. Gallant obviously can sense it. Panacea probably knows that he can sense it.
Sure.
And so, but she loves her sister and she wants what's best for her too. So she's doing her best to not act on it. Gallant is as well. But you could see this being very tense and convoluted situation down the road.
So yeah, they kind of come to a detente there. And after they finish in there, Panacea goes to the board where they're writing down information on the heroes, and she helps to fill in a few blanks on based upon her encounter with Tattletale and with Skitter, as they appear to be calling her now. Overall, that's the end of the arc. Impressions, thoughts on arc 3?
Well, it was amazing in the battle and robbery sequence. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. It was well played, well written. I like the Tinker Kid win with his kind of going off book and then the consequences of that down the road.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many different twists. I really liked how that all worked out. One thing I'd like to touch on in the wards was the idea that they're kind of in this fishbowl because everybody knows about capes and the superpowers and the supervillains. And so it's almost like, you know, when the Marvel movies came out and everybody was buying Captain America costumes and Hulk fists that made noises and stuff. Now you go a whole step beyond that, where it's like you can actually go see Captain America as a teenager and
right. Yeah,
go
because
through
of the
their
tours.
headquarters. Yeah.
The tours of the ward's headquarters. Yeah.
So that was another thing where that world building aspect where it's like, wow, I never thought about that, but that would be super annoying, especially if you just had a battle where you lost and it's like, hurry and get cleaned up. We got the next tour coming through. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I really don't want to be bothered by this. I just got hit by a 2.5 ton dog. Leave me alone.
Exactly. I've got a hole all the way through my body. Can we shut down for an hour? Is that too much to ask?
Any other impressions?
No, I think overall, like I said, I really enjoyed it and
Cool.
And excited to see, still very intrigued by the boss and what might be going on there and seeing
right.
what's going to come up.
That.
Yeah. There's just, again, too many movies, too many books, but it's kind of like, yeah, could this be Lisa's dad? Could it be somebody from the Protectorate kind of going along with Lisa's thing of keeping people in balance so that the good guys always have bad guys to fight? Could it be, maybe, it's somebody from controlling them from Earth Aleph or something and trying to get them to all take each other out so that Earth Aleph can move in. I don't know. It's just
fun speculation.
sent my mind spinning, definitely.
Awesome. And now it's time for Andy to announce his choice for key character of the arc. Whether hero or villain, cape or civilian, Andy will identify the characters who stood out to him, whether for good or ill. Andy, anybody in this selection or anybody in this arc stand out for you?
Yeah, there was one person and kind of got short shrift, not a lot of pub during this arc, but I really liked Regent. If it weren't for some of his perfectly timed actions during the battle, then the team's chance of success would have really been almost nothing.
Very true.
They mentioned that, Aegis fell short on one attack, people's aims got thrown off, and it was really interesting because throughout the arc they were kind of downplaying his abilities or how effective he would be, and he seemed like he even thought he was kind of just along for the ride and not really had a huge impact. But it's amazing how making a shot miss by a few inches can totally change the battle. So I thought that was really cool. Also, I would have wanted to keep this flying skateboard as well. I'm totally with him on that one.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah. To that point with regards to the battle, during the debrief, the ward's debrief, Browbeat said he went to move and everything, cramped up and twisted the wrong direction. He fell down and he said, well, I think I got tased after that. So between messing with Aegis's flight path and taking down Browbeat, I think he got a good point. He had a successful battle during the heist.
Yeah, I think the team would have really struggled without him being there. I think he turned the tide.
Excellent. So there you have it. We have Regent as our key character for the arc. And as we say goodnight, anything else you want to add or say to the folks?
I don't think so. Just again, it's super hard to not read ahead. Really chomping at the bit, but it's just so exciting to get this kind of thing in this format. And I could spend all day reading it, but I'm doing my best to hold to our format.
Well, I definitely am. I'm thankful for that, my friend. So, folks, we once again want to say thank you very much for spending your time with us. We appreciate you being here, and we hope to catch you in our next podcast. Thanks for being here. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next time.
Thanks for joining us in this video. We hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. If not, thanks for stopping by anyway, and we hope you'll return. Music is by the band YYNOT from their self-titled debut CD. You can find more information in the link down below. Catch you later.